I was standing there, in the hospital corridor, holding a camera that trembled in my hands, when I saw something that would challenge everything I believed about life. A silvery light, soft as the morning breeze, hovered over room 304, and within it, I swear on everything sacred, there was a feminine figure in a white dress and a blue mantle. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a reflection of the corridor's light. It was something my rational mind could never explain, but that my heart, for the first time in decades, recognized as true. My name is Raphael Moore. I'm 38 years old, and until that moment, I was the most skeptical journalist you could imagine. I spent my whole life fighting against religious dogmas, writing essays and documentaries that exposed superstition, always defending reason above all else. I was the guy who laughed when someone talked about miracles, who rolled his eyes when he heard stories of apparitions or inexplicable cures. For me, everything had a scientific explanation, and anyone who thought differently was naive or being manipulated. When my editor sent me to cover a case in the countryside, I thought it would be just another story about simple folk who confused coincidence with miracle. The case was about Paul Sawyer, a 50-year-old lawyer, a staunch atheist like me, who had fallen into a deep coma after a severe stroke. According to the rumors, he had miraculously awakened and was telling everyone he had seen the Virgin Mary at his bedside. I laughed when I heard that. A lawyer, a cultured man, talking about apparitions? It had to be delirium or a medication side effect. The trip to the county hospital was long. I drove my old car along the dusty country roads, listening to podcasts about critical thinking, mentally preparing myself to dismantle yet another religious hoax. The smell of eucalyptus wafted in through the open windows, and I felt confident, as I always did when I was about to expose the truth behind popular beliefs. It could be spontaneous recovery, I argued, trying to find a logical explanation. Dr. Helen looked at me with that look doctors have when they know more than they're saying. It could be, she agreed, but it wasn't just that. There were other things. That's when she introduced me to Sister Mary Lucy, a 62-year-old woman who volunteered at the hospital chapel. Mary Lucy was one of those people who radiate peace, you know? She spoke slowly, in a gentle voice, and had a way of looking that seemed to see right through you. She told me she was doing her nightly prayer rounds when she saw the light above Paul's room. It wasn't an ordinary light, she explained, sitting in the small hospital chapel, her hands clasped in her lap. It was a light that seemed alive, that pulsed gently, and inside it I saw a woman. White dress, blue mantle, eyes full of compassion. She reached out to Paul and whispered something I couldn't hear. I wrote everything down, but inside I was thinking, another religious lady who saw what she wanted to see. I asked about the corridor lighting, about any medications she might have been taking, about the possibility of having dreamed it. She answered all my questions patiently, but maintained her version of events. "Son," she said at the end, "I know you don't believe. I see it in your eyes. But sometimes the truth doesn't need our permission to exist." Then I talked to Marina, Paul's wife. She was visibly emotional, her eyes red from crying, but it was a cry of relief, not sadness. She told me about the dreams her husband had during the coma, dreams where a maternal woman encouraged him to fight, said it wasn't her time yet. "I know it may sound crazy," she said, drying her eyes with a crumpled tissue, "but Paul was never a fanciful person. He's a lawyer, a man of law, always been as skeptical as you. When he told me about the woman in his dreams, I saw in his eyes a certainty I had never seen before." While she spoke, I found myself thinking about my father. He had died at 52, a victim of aggressive cancer. I had spent countless nights by his bedside, pleading with any higher power that might exist to save him. Nothing happened. He died on a cold July morning, and I left the hospital convinced that if God existed, he didn't care about human suffering. But here I was, 20 years later, listening to stories that echoed the same desperate pleas I had made, only this time with a different outcome. Part of me wanted to believe, but my rational mind kept searching for logical explanations. The moment that changed my life happened when I finally met Paul. He was awake, sitting up in bed, and there was something different about him. It wasn't just the fact that he was alive and lucid after a deep coma. It was something in his eyes, a serenity I had never seen in anyone. He spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully, like someone who had gone through a transformative experience. "Raphael," he said, "I know you came here to expose a hoax. I'd do the same thing in your place. I spent my whole life defending reason, fighting against religious obscurantism. But what happened to me? That has no rational explanation." He told me about the moment he was between life and death, suspended in a place that was neither light nor darkness. "I felt a presence," he explained. "It wasn't a voice I heard with my ears, but something that spoke directly to my soul. And then she appeared." Paul described the woman in detail that sent chills down my spine. The white dress that seemed made of light, the blue mantle that rippled without wind, the eyes that radiated unconditional love. "She reached out to me," he continued, and said, "Rise, my son, there is still a path to walk." As he spoke, I felt something strange happening inside me, a lump in my throat, a pressure in my chest that I couldn't explain. It wasn't just emotion at the touching story, it was something deeper, as if a part of me that had been buried for a long time was trying to awaken. Paul continued, "I saw every feature of her face, the gentleness of her smile, the compassion in her eyes, the golden glow around his figure, and I felt a peace I had never experienced before. It wasn't relief at recovery, it was something bigger, as if I had touched the essence of what truly matters in life." It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. I was focused on recording the interview when I heard a whisper in the hallway. It was Sister Mary Lucy calling Dr. Helen. They were looking at the hospital's security cameras, and there was something in their expressions that caught my attention. "Can I see that?" I asked, indicating the monitor. Dr. Helen hesitated for a moment, then called me over. "This was recorded the night Paul woke up," she explained, "at 3:17 a.m. On the monitor, I saw the hallway empty and silent. Then, for a few seconds, a silvery light appeared on the screen, hovering over the door of room 304. It wasn't a reflection, it wasn't a defect in the recording, it was a real light, captured by the hospital's cameras. "It could be a technical problem," I murmured, but my voice sounded uncertain even to myself. "It could be," Dr. Helen agreed, "but it happened exactly at the moment Paul woke up. And look at this." She pointed to the screen. For a split second, within the light, it was possible to see a feminine silhouette. It wasn't clear, but it was there, undeniable. I asked to see the recording several times. I analyzed each frame, looked for technical explanations, compared it with other recordings from the same cameras. I found nothing that could rationally explain it. If you're watching this report and want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because what I'm going to tell you next will surprise you even more. Because that image on the security cameras was only the beginning of my journey. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed at the small-town hotel, replaying everything I had seen and heard. Part of me wanted to leave, write a story about the power of faith and the curiosities of medicine, filed a case, and move on. But there was something that bothered me, an inner voice telling me to stay another day. The next morning, I returned to the hospital. I didn't have an appointment, I was just following an impulse. I found Sister Mary Lucy in the chapel, arranging flowers on the altar. She saw me and smiled, as if she had been waiting for me. "You came back," she said simply. "I don't know why," I confessed. "I have enough material for the story." "But you don't have enough answers to your questions," she replied, continuing to arrange the flowers. "Sit down, son, let's talk." I sat down on the front bench, and she approached. There was something about her manner that calmed and unsettled me at the same time. "Can I ask you a personal question?" she asked. I nodded. "You lost someone important, didn't you? Someone you loved very much." I felt the air leave my lungs. How could she know? "My father," I murmured, "20 years ago." "And you prayed for him. You asked for a miracle that didn't come." They weren't questions, they were statements. Sister Mary Lucy spoke as if she knew my story. "How do you know?" I asked. "Because I see it in your eyes," she replied. "The same pain I saw in Paul's eyes before the apparition. The same revolt against heaven that I've seen in many people who have come through here." She sat beside me. "Son, sometimes we ask for miracles on our timeline, but they arrive on God's. Sometimes we pray for someone to be saved, and salvation comes in a way we never expected." "My father died," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "There was no miracle, no salvation." "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "Or did you just not know how to see it?" I was about to respond, but she continued. "Your father taught you to seek the truth, didn't he? To be honest, to fight for justice. Don't you think that's a way for him to live on?" I felt my eyes welling up. It had been so long since I'd thought of my father that way. I'd been so focused on his absence that I'd forgotten all the values he'd instilled in me. "But that's not a miracle," I protested. "It's just normal life." "Who says miracles can't be a part of normal life?" she replied. "Who says the sacred can't manifest in the everyday?" At that moment, I realized something. For years, I'd been looking for God in the wrong places. I'd expected spectacular signs, dramatic interventions, as if the divine were obligated to manifest according to my expectations. But perhaps the sacred was in the small details, in Dr. Helen's compassion, in Sister Mary Lucy's serenity, in Paul's genuine transformation. "You want to know if there really was an apparition in Paul's room?" she asked. "I need to know," I replied. "Then close your eyes and open your heart. Sometimes the truth doesn't come through reason, but through intuition." I closed my eyes there in the silent chapel. It wasn't something I normally did, meditate, pray, or anything of the sort, but something told me to try. I took a deep breath and tried to empty my mind of all the questions, all the doubts, all the biases. And then, in the silence of the chapel, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a presence. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't a vision. It was a feeling of welcome, of understanding, of unconditional love. For a moment, I felt like a child again, protected and loved. When I opened my eyes, Sister Mary Lucy was looking at me with a gentle smile. "You felt it, didn't you?" I couldn't answer. My throat was tight, my eyes filled with tears I couldn't control. "She's here," she said softly. "She's always been. Not just in Paul's room, but everywhere there's suffering, wherever comfort is needed. Sometimes she manifests visibly, as happened with Paul. Other times she works through people, through medicine, through love." I spent the rest of the morning in the chapel, talking to Sister Mary Lucy about faith, about doubt, about the difference between religion and spirituality. She didn't try to convert me to any specific doctrine. She simply helped me understand that questioning wasn't the opposite of believing, that the search for truth could include mysteries that science couldn't yet explain. At lunchtime, I returned to Paul's room. He was better, stronger, preparing for discharge the next day. We talked about his experience, and I realized he was going through the same process as me, reconciling reason with faith, finding a balance between skepticism and openness to mystery. "You know what strikes me most?" Paul said. "It's not the fact that I saw an apparition, it's the transformation it caused in me. I was a bitter person, always arguing, always trying to prove I was right. Now I feel a peace I've never had before." "But aren't you afraid people will think you've gone crazy?" I asked. "No," he replied without hesitation, "because I know what I experienced, and if it can bring hope to other people, then it's worth sharing."
That afternoon, I spoke again with Dr. Helen. She showed me other cases she'd witnessed over the years, inexplicable recoveries, moments of sudden peace in terminal patients, families finding comfort amidst grief. I won't say they're all miracles, she explained, but there are things that happen here that defy our medical understanding. And you know what I've learned? That recognizing our limits isn't weakness, it's wisdom. She told me about her own spiritual journey, how she'd learned to balance scientific knowledge with openness to mystery. I didn't stop being a doctor, she said, but I became a better doctor because I learned that healing isn't just treating symptoms, it's caring for the whole person.
When evening came, I was ready to leave. I'd gathered enough material for a story, but I knew what I would write would be very different from what I'd originally planned. It wouldn't be a text debunking a religious hoax, but an honest account of the complexity of the human experience. I was packing my equipment when Sister Mary Lucy appeared in the hallway. "You're leaving?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, "but not the same way I arrived." "I know," she said. "You came looking for a story, but you found a truth." She handed me a small wooden rosary. "Take this," she said, "not as a charm, but as a reminder that there are mysteries in life that deserve our reverence." I took the rosary and put it in my pocket. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "No, son," she replied, "thank you for coming with an open heart, even without knowing." Driving back to Chicago, the hospital lights fading in my rearview mirror, I felt something fundamental had shifted within me. It wasn't that I'd suddenly become religious, but I'd rediscovered something I thought I'd lost forever: the capacity for wonder, for accepting that there are aspects of reality that transcend our current understanding. The article I published was unlike anything I'd written before. It wasn't cynical or credulous, it was honest. I wrote about Paul, his inexplicable recovery, the testimonies I'd gathered. But I also wrote about my own journey, about how the case had forced me to question my own certainties. The reaction was intense. Some readers accused me of losing my mind, others said I'd finally found the truth. But what struck me most were the messages from people who'd had similar experiences. Moments of transcendence, encounters with the inexplicable, profound transformations that defied conventional explanations. I realized there were a large number of people living in the middle ground between absolute skepticism and blind faith, people seeking to understand life's mysteries without abandoning reason. And I had become a voice for these people. Months later, I received a call from Marina, Paul's wife. She told me her husband had completely changed. He was still a lawyer, but he'd started volunteering, helping people in need. "It's like he's the same person, but with a bigger heart," she said. I had changed too. I remained a journalist, I continued investigating, I kept asking tough questions. But I learned to do it with humility, acknowledging that there are limits to what we can know and understand. The rosary Sister Mary Lucy gave me remained on my desk, not as an object of worship, but as a reminder that mystery and reason can coexist, that the pursuit of truth doesn't have to exclude the possibility of the sacred. Looking back, I realized that experience at the hospital was a watershed moment in my life. Not because I became religious, but because I became more whole. I learned that true wisdom lies not in having all the answers, but in asking the right questions. And sometimes the most important questions are those that have no answers, at least not yet. Paul made a full recovery. He returned to work, but with a different perspective on life. Dr. Helen continued saving lives, but with a deeper understanding of what it means to heal. Sister Mary Lucy continued her prayers and volunteer work, being a presence of peace for everyone who crossed her path. And me? I continued my journey, now with the awareness that there's far more mystery in life than I'd ever imagined. I didn't abandon my skepticism, but I learned to temper it with humility. I didn't become a believer in the traditional sense, but I opened myself to the possibility that there are forces in life that transcend our current understanding. That silvery light I saw in the hospital corridor, that feminine figure the security cameras captured, that moment of Paul's transformation, It all remains a mystery to me. But I've learned that not all mysteries need to be solved to be true. Sometimes it's the mystery itself that transforms us. If there's anything I'd like to leave with those listening to this story, it's this. Keep an open mind. Question everything, but don't close your heart to the possibilities life offers. Truth is bigger than any belief system, bigger than any doctrine, bigger than any explanation we can give. And who knows, maybe one day you too will find yourself facing something that challenges your certainties, something that invites you to expand your understanding of what's possible. When that happens, remember, sometimes the greatest courage isn't in denying the mystery, but embracing it. The miracle that changed my life wasn't just Paul's recovery or the apparition so many witnessed. It was the rediscovery of the capacity for wonder, of accepting that there are aspects of reality that are larger than our current understanding. It was learning that the pursuit of truth doesn't have to be a war against mystery, but a dance with it. Today, when I pass hospitals, when I see people suffering, when I encounter situations that defy easy explanations, I remember that night in the small-town county hospital. I remember the silvery light, Paul's serenity, Sister Mary Lucy's wisdom, and I feel a deep gratitude for having been invited to participate in that mystery, for having been transformed by it. Because in the end, life isn't about having all the answers. It's about being open to the questions that transform us. It's about recognizing that, however much we know, there's always something more to discover, something more to understand, something more to love. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson that experience taught me, that mystery isn't the enemy of reason, but its closest partner in the pursuit of truth. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it can, in some way, touch your heart as that experience touched mine. And remember, sometimes miracles happen not to impress us, but to remind us that there's far more mystery and beauty in life than we can imagine. Thank you.